Hello, General Biology, and welcome to screencast number 3 of Chapter 1, Section 1.3, and we've been talking more specifically about those characteristics of living things, and we're up to structure and function. So with this, we just talked about evolution, where the organisms can change. And we know that the organisms have evolved in its own collection of structures that have evolved in ways that make particular functions possible. We're going to talk about the very first cell. Was very, very tiny and had a little strand of genetic information in it. And the cells that make up the living organisms of today are much larger, and they have these other tiny collections of structures that are inside of them. And some of these structures, or they're all different structures that are inside of there, might have been individual cells at one point, but in order to survive and evolve, they wound up joining together and living together in order to survive. So this is one of the ideas of evolution, how organisms came to evolve, and then the cells were able to join together and form as species that have adapted to the life in different environments. So this cell could actually turn into, let's say, an insect. And I'm just going to draw a crazy little insect. Don't know what it is. Kind of looks like a butterfly, but it could evolve into that insect. And then maybe that insect could, and you're going to laugh again at my artistic talents, here it could develop into a bird. Okay, and that chicken or that bird could develop into something else. Not too far apart, but that's the idea of evolution. So the next thing is, because of that DNA, we've got some unity where we're linked together, but yet because of that DNA, we've got diversity of life. Remember I said the adenine, the thymine, the guanine, and the cytosine? I called them the letters of the DNA alphabet. These can be arranged in 64 different 3-letter combinations. Okay? If you can arrange those letters in 64 3-letter combinations, how many different ways can you make these 64 different combinations? And that's going to give you variety. And as you look around at your friends, that's why you all don't have the same nose shape and the same hair color and the same eye color, and that because of the way the A, the T's, the C's, and the G's can be arranged. But yet you're united because we're all made up of these A, T, C's, and G's. And for girls and boys, but for girls, since we're all females, we've got a basic ATCG pattern, and then the difference is how tall we're going to be, our eye color, where our freckles are placed. Okay, so that's the diversity that we have. The evolutionary theory explains both this unity and the life of life and its diversity when we go back and we look at how organisms can evolve and change. All organisms are composed of a common set of carbon-based molecules. We're going to talk about this, and we're going to call it organic chemistry. Okay? And carbon is the backbone of the molecules. We're going to talk about that organism containing the stored information in that genetic code, which I just mentioned here. And we haven't mentioned this too much, but that is going to be used to build the proteins that make up the structures that carry out the life functions, those life processes. You heard me say interdependence in nature. And this is a huge word, interdependence. So we get the idea of dependence. We depend on something. Interdependence means between. So it's our dependence between the other organisms. I hate mosquitoes. I hate being on their menu during the summer with a passion. Can't stand them. I know that when I die, I'm going to ask God why He ever created them. Well, I know why. And we depend on them because their larva feeds fish. And this tiny little fish that it feeds bigger fish. And the bigger fish that feed on it feed even bigger fish. And those bigger fish feed us. So we need those mosquitoes. So I can kind of take a little bit of comfort in knowing that if I eat a fish, I'm paying back that fish for eating the mosquitoes, and I'm getting satisfied that it did its job. It kept those mosquito numbers down. So we depend on that. We have that interdependence. We also have that interdependence on non-living things, on our climate. Organisms live within particular climate ranges. They need a certain amount of precipitation. They need a certain temperature. We're dependent on that in order to be able to survive. So it's not only the living, but it's the non-living. So all forms of life are connected in the area where they live, called the biosphere. And that means the living planet. And the organisms are linked to one another and to the land and the water and the air that's around them. They're going to have a specific job. All of these organisms are going to have a job, and that job is going to help keep that biosphere balanced and supporting life. These relationships between the organisms and their environments depend on the ability to cycle matter and the flow of energy. Without the matter and energy, they can't do their job. So they help to recycle that. Carbon dioxide is deadly. CO2 is deadly. Okay, we can't live in a world with just CO2. But guess what? Plants consume CO2. And when they consume it, they convert it into oxygen and sugar. Well, guess what? We need oxygen. So humans need that oxygen. Humans need that sugar. And guess what humans produce? Humans produce the CO2. So, and waste. And that waste and that CO2 are used by the plants. So we are connected to those plants in order to be able to convert this deadly CO2 that we need. And plants, it's not deadly to them. They need it in order to survive. So when we look at science, science is a way of knowing. The job of science uses observations, questions, experiments to explain the natural world and the natural forces. When you have successful scientific research, it reveals the rules and patterns that can explain and predict at least some of the events in nature. So this whole connection that we talked about earlier, that's what science is going to do. It's going to keep us connected and understanding. We're going to be able to take actions that affect events in the world around us. We're going to be able to make predictions from that. We're going to be able to use the science to benefit society and understand nature and the nature of science. There are different fields of biology that are out there to study, and we're going to just consider a few of them. Some of the fields may be overlapping, but they could use different tools to get different information so that they can understand the planet. So global ecology is one of these fields, and that is how life on Earth is shaped by weather patterns and processes in the atmosphere that we are just beginning really to understand, and we're seeing the impact of the change in those weather patterns. We understand through global ecology the activities of living organisms. And we're a living organism, so that includes humans, and the profound effect that we have on both the atmosphere and the climate. We are causing changes that are shaping the climate and the atmosphere, so we have an impact on that as well. We look at global ecological studies that enable us to learn about our global impact, which affects all life on Earth. Maybe one of the activities that we're going to do in this section will be doing an ecological footprint. I'll tell you more about that when we get to class, okay? But we'll see what impact you have on the planet. Ecologists, it says as an example here, may monitor lichens. Are you familiar with lichens? Yeah, probably not. Lichens are what we call primary producers, and they are the ones that when an area has been damaged, they're like the first organism that comes in, and they're kind of scaly. They attach to trees and to rocks. You've probably seen them. They're kind of greenish and yellow. And ecologists may monitor these lichens in a forest in efforts to study the effects of air pollution on the forest health, because they won't develop if it is too polluted. Biotechnology is another field, and this is based on our ability to edit and rewrite the genetic code. I participated in a lab where I made bacteria immune to penicillin. I took out the gene of the bacteria that made it die from the penicillin. I removed it so that it wouldn't die when it came in contact with penicillin. And this is something that we're doing on bigger levels in hopes that one day we'll be able to take the bad genes out and replace them with good genes. We may soon learn to correct or replace damaged genes that caused inherited diseases or genetically engineered bacteria to clean up toxic waste or produce fuel. So biotechnology raises enormous ethical and legal and social questions because there's that. Are you manipulating human species? Could you create the zombie apocalypse? Look at all the zombie shows that are coming out. And that's one of the concerns. If we start playing around with it, there's always chance for error. And could human error create a disease worse than any disease that we've ever seen, cancer or anything like that? Building the tree of life. Biologists have discovered and identified roughly about 1.8 million different kinds of living organisms. We estimate that there's about 2 to 100 million more life forms that we have not discovered yet around the globe. And again, what's limiting us is the technology. Paleontologists are studying signs of ancient life through looking at fossilized dinosaur dung, that's their poop, so that they can get a better understanding of the type of organisms that existed long ago and to kind of see the change that's happening. They're identifying and cataloging all these life forms, and they hope to combine the latest genetic information with computer technology to organize all living things into a single universal tree of life, so that we can see where we all came from. And it'll be a complicated web type form that people can access. Okay, so I'm going to end this here because we just have a few minutes. It looks like section 1.3 is going to have maybe 4 screencasts to it. All right, so I'll see you in the next screencast.